A long sword stood in the battlefield, and a pair of hands pulled it up before swinging it down fiercely at the enemy. Suddenly, a cavalryman charged onto the battlefield, only to be struck down from his horse by a member of the Knights Templar wielding an axe. This was the battle between the Templars and the French army. Landry looked towards the battlefield and saw a familiar figure, King Philip of France. This was the perfect opportunity for revenge for Joan. Landry shouted out to King Philip, who was evidently waiting for this moment as well. One was the hatred of taking his wife, and the other was the hatred of taking his love. So the two of them stopped talking and directly started to launch their attacks. Landry swung his sword, but Philip was well armored and took no damage. As the fight continued, Landry was unable to inflict any harm on Philip. As a king, Philip is quite powerful. Landry pressed his sword against Philip's chest, angrily accusing him of killing Joan. Philip countered that it was Landry who had caused Joan's death, claiming she could have peacefully lived as his queen had Landry not disrupted that peace. Philip's sword pierced through Landry's armor, and he could hear the sound of metal cutting into flesh as he was forcefully pushed to the ground. When he stood up again, he had lost his advantage. Philip slashed at Landry's thigh, showcasing his improved swordsmanship. Philip's blade stabbed through his body, and then he delivered another blow from behind. Philip intended for Landry to witness the judgment of the king's sword. Just then, Landry jolted awake, realizing it had all been a dream. It felt so real that it left him breathless. A baby's cry pulled Landry back to reality. He picked up his daughter, unsure of how to soothe her. He began to sing, and to his relief, the baby stopped crying. As he looked at his daughter swaddled in his arms and then up at the sky, Landry made a decision. He entrusted his daughter to Tancred. Although he loved her dearly and wished to care for her, keeping the child with him wouldn't be wise. The king would surely be looking for him everywhere, and he didn't want his daughter to live in danger. Tancred assured him that he would take the child to a place where no one would know her and let her grow up safely there. When he asked Landry where he planned to go, Landry replied that he would head to the Shrine of Chartres. He intended to go to the Knights Templar headquarters to apologize to the Grand Master and his brothers, seeking their forgiveness. Tancred thought this was not a wise choice, considering that the battle in the forest of Versailles had resulted in heavy losses for the Templars. As a result, most of the knights harbored deep resentment towards Landry. After hearing this, Landry felt it was even more imperative that he seek atonement. He had always been a Knight Templar, and without the shrine, he didn't know what else he could do. Therefore, he needed to seek God's forgiveness. Seeing Landry's determination, Tancred could do nothing to stop him. Before leaving, Tancred mentioned that he would have the child baptized and asked Landry what her name would be. After some thought, Landry chose the name Eve for his daughter. After escorting Eve away, Landry mounted his horse and rode toward the Shrine of Chartres. The people here did not welcome him, and he was no longer the leader of the Paris Templars, because it was Landry himself who buried the Knights of Paris. Following a signal from the Grand Master, members of the Order immediately launched their attack on Landry. 2 Templars helped him up but took away everything that belonged to him as a knight. Once again, Landry was knocked to the ground by the Templars, and he was subsequently expelled from the Order. Landry remained outside the city gates for 3 weeks. Every week, he would bang on the doors, and the guards grew increasingly annoyed. They told him they had never let him in before, and they wouldn't be opening the gates now, as the Grand Master had decided to expel him. Yet, Landry continued to kneel outside, undeterred by the weather. One rainy day, the Grand Master watched Landry from the citadel, and his heart began to waver. He saw that Landry was a warrior who shouldn't just die outside like this. Thus, he sent Tancred to bring Landry back into the city. Members of the Templar were divided and argued over whether or not Landry should be allowed to rejoin. The Grand Master found their squabbling foolish and ultimately decided to hold a vote regarding Landry's fate. And Landry is going to be retraining with the newcomers to test to see if they have what it takes to be a Templar. Meanwhile, in the French royal palace, Philip and William DeNogaret were discussing matters of state. William reported that he had been searching nationwide for Landry, but so far, there was no news. Isabella was present, listening to their conversation about Landry. Philip expressed his desire to declare war on the Templars and directly assault the Shrine of Chartres. However, William advised against such an action, as it would equate to declaring war on the papacy itself. Currently, they were in no position to wage war, especially since France owed a debt to the church. If the war were to commence, the church would demand repayment, leading to severe financial problems. William suggested that King Philip spread rumors to sway public opinion in their favor, but first, they needed to resolve another matter. One of the guards openly spreads the news that Philip killed Queen Joan, and the soldier is arrested for it. This news is the exact opposite of what the king himself has been spreading. According to Philip, it was Landry who killed Queen Joan, but the captured squire in front of him was there at the time, and he was adamant that it was Philip who did it. In front of everyone, Philip cruelly ordered the guard's tongue to be cut out.
No!
The vote to decide Landry's fate began. Tancred cast the first affirmative vote, but after voting concluded, the result was a tie. At this time, only one Templar named Naaman did not vote. His vote would determine whether Landry would stay or go. After Naaman voted, the Grand Master immediately announced that Landry would join the Knights Templar as a new recruit. Training begins at this point, with Tancred helping Landry cut his hair, symbolizing a new life. The recruits had to carry 2 bags of stones and run laps. These bags weighed the same as the armor worn by the Templars. This exercise was designed to help them adapt quickly to the feeling of wearing armor. The head of the regiment in charge of training the new recruits voted against Landry's retention not long ago, and Landry's future training could be grueling. Most of the new recruits came from noble families and had willingly relinquished their inheritances to join the Templars and become servants of God. Due to their backgrounds, these young men had mostly endured psychological rather than physical hardships. After walking a few rounds with 2 bags of stones on their backs, one of them fell down. Landry went up to help the young man, only to be kicked aside by the head recruit. He then stated that everyone had to work their way into the Templars on their own, just mind your own business, and that if you dared to disobey the head, you would be expelled outright. At that moment, a group of cavalry charged recklessly through the streets of Paris. The leader rode into the hall and dismounted in front of the king. When he took off his cloak, Isabella excitedly called out his name. Louis was the eldest son of Philip and Queen Joan. He was kneeling in front of his father, and several of the ringed fingers were lying in Louis's hand. These were the fingers of the old aristocrats, remnants of the old power from the Pope's faction, now converted into new nobility loyal to King Philip. Philip embraced his son joyfully, and Isabella warmly hugged her brother. Louis didn't have a good relationship with William. He directly ordered William to take his horse out and clean it, viewing him as nothing more than a groom. At that moment, Louis was still unaware that his mother had died, and he inquired about her. When he learned of her passing, he was devastated and smashed a chair in his grief. Philip told him that Landry had killed Queen Joan, and Louis was consumed with rage, eager to take revenge on Landry. Louis had a close relationship with his mother, and if he discovered that it was Philip who had killed her, it was uncertain what he might do. In an underground fighting arena, a burly man was relentlessly attacking an opponent lying on the ground. The atmosphere among the spectators was electric, and the victor was rewarded with a bag of gold coins before leaving. The host introduced the next pair of contestants. The first one to appear was a strong man who never left any chance for his opponent to survive. Then came the former Crusaders. He was seen sipping his drink and walking slowly over to what turned out to be Gawain. It is really sad that he has to rely on boxing to make a living now. The burly fighter, relying on his size and strength, swung his weapon wildly. Gawain dodged easily, but the strong man was beaten badly. Following the big man's defeat, he got back up and continued swinging his axe. Gawain killed the opponent directly with the weapon in his hand. The audience shouted and cheered excitedly. The young boy shouted desperately for his mother and father, but as he looked at his parents bound to the stake, he felt utterly helpless. All he could do was watch as the priest set the wooden platform ablaze with a torch. His parents had committed no heinous crime. They were simply Cathars who claimed to be Christians, and for this, they were to suffer the brutal punishment of burning at the stake. The boy cried out, pleading for mercy, but the priest remained unmoved. The parents were engulfed in flames in front of their children, and the priest was still talking about his so-called justice. After the fire had burned down, the boy scooped up a handful of ash from the charred remains and placed it in a bag. Prince Louis dug out his mother, Queen Joan, from behind the scenes. In tears, he asked his father why they had to desecrate her body and subject her to disembowelment even after her death. The only reason for this gruesome act was that the queen's child with Landry was still alive. The king then gave Prince Louis a task. He was not confident in giving this task to anyone other than him. King Philip instructed Louis to find Landry and eliminate the queen's child. King Philip had finally decided to marry Princess Isabella off to England. Although the princess was unwilling, she had no other choice at that moment. King Philip said that Isabella's mother was dead, and even if Joan was still alive, it would not change anything. Just then, William brought news that Pope Boniface had arrived in Paris, claiming to mourn Queen Joan. William suspected the Pope was only there to aggravate the king. He never appeared when it was beneficial, but only when it could worsen the situation. As the Pope entered the palace, he called out King Philip's name and raised his right hand, gesturing for the king to kiss his ring. King Philip was visibly displeased, and everyone glanced at him, but he directed his gaze at William and nodded slightly. Receiving the signal, William stepped forward to kiss the Pope's ring. The Pope stated that he had come to mourn Queen Joan, but King Philip was reluctant to discuss that topic. He preferred to talk about a decree the Pope had drafted regarding the relationship between secular and religious authority. Although the Pope was initially hesitant to speak on the matter, the king insisted, prompting the Pope to oblige.
And so, I declare that submission on the part of every man, be he serf, or royal councillor, or king.
As the Pope spoke the words, King Philip clenched his fists in anger. William found Gawain and asked him to do something. Once completed, it could lead to great opportunities for him. Gawain arrived at a residence defended by several guards. Using just a single coin, he managed to take down all the guards. Though Gawain was unexpectedly injured in the process, he successfully neutralized the guards, and William soon appeared. William opened the door to find the Pope sitting inside. He began telling the Pope a story about his childhood, revealing that the priest in question was now Pope Boniface. William had been quietly waiting for a chance for revenge. He couldn't comprehend how a so-called compassionate and loving faith could permit such a hypocritical priest to ascend to the papacy. Ever since his parents' deaths, he had lost faith in the clergy and no longer believed in heaven or hell. The Pope remembered William's parents, but he still didn't think he was wrong. At this point, he felt William was acting out of personal vengeance, implying that this was not the king's intention. Clearly, the Pope had overestimated his own standing. By the time he spoke of the edict he had drafted, he had already lost the king, a devout believer. William punched the Pope, knocking him down, and the Pope called for Gawain's help. Recognizing Gawain as a Knight Templar, the Pope sought his assistance. However, Gawain stated that he was once a Templar, but was no longer one, and turned away. The king had already decided to oust Pope Boniface and would support a more rational pope in his place. As for how to facilitate the Pope's resignation, that was entirely up to William. William tightened his grip on the Pope's neck and informed him that he would be buried alongside heretics after death. The revenge of more than 20 years was finally taken, and William took out the bag containing the burnt ashes of his parents. Landry, as a recruit, returned to the shrine of Chartres in secrecy with Tancred and others. They planned to retrieve the gold hidden in a secret room beneath the shrine. The group quickly dispatched 2 guards and concealed their bodies elsewhere, but they failed to clean up the blood left behind. They hurriedly collected the gold and prepared to escape, pushing open the door to the secret chamber. Just then, a patrolling guard spotted the blood on the ground and summoned more guards. As the battle was about to break out, a new soldier was shot in the thigh by a crossbow and fell down, and then he was hit by another arrow. To protect his comrades, Landry disregarded the captain's orders and left the formation to engage the enemy in close combat. The captain had no choice but to join the fight, taking out several crossbowmen as the battle intensified. Landry ultimately failed to save the recruits, and one recruit even hid because he was nervous. Fortunately, they managed to escape with the gold back to Chartres safely. In the end, 2 members of the Templar Order lost their lives, the recruit and a Knight Templar named Naaman, who had cast the crucial vote for Landry's return. The captain looked at the 2 dead men, and the implication of his words was that it was because Landry disobeyed orders that the devout soldiers died. But the team leader still wanted Landry to leave, as he felt that Landry brought bad luck. Landry had no words to defend himself and instead took up a whip in the middle of the night to punish himself and seek atonement. The new recruit's captain watched him from a distance, nodding in acknowledgement. After experiencing life and death, Landry's relationship with the recruits became more amicable. They were challenged to a wall climbing contest on a rainy day. The walls outside were extremely slippery, and the first few groups of recruits failed the challenge, facing 2 days without food as a result. The other recruits in Landry's group asked how he had succeeded previously. Landry admitted that this challenge hadn't existed when he was a recruit. However, a remark from the new recruit's captain sparked an idea in him. United in spirit, they decided that since there were no ladders, they would make a human ladder. Landry and another recruit acted as the base while the others climbed up. Even though a human wall had been built, it still wasn't high enough. Landry decided to support himself alone at the bottom and let another recruit climb up. He bore all the weight, and although the recruit fell halfway up, he did not give up.
Get up before my back breaks!
Ultimately, the recruit managed to reach the top of the wall and asked the captain if he could throw down a rope, to which the captain agreed. Landry's group succeeded in the challenge, resulting in a slight smile at the captain's lips. During the night, Landry discovers that one of the recruits is keeping a scroll from his mother. The recruit believed that as long as he recited it daily, he wouldn't die a tragic death. However, Landry warned him that carrying personal items would lead to punishment if discovered, advising him to get rid of it quickly. The recruit agreed but was reported the very next day. The informer received no reward. As the Templar Order had no need for traitors among their ranks, Landry attempted to take the blame, but the captain saw through his scheme. As a result, everyone was punished and forced to carry sandbags until sunset. Landry and several others did not go as the team leader assigned them other tasks. He instructed them to find a suitable tree stump for physical training, cut it down, strip the bark, and carry it back on foot. However, completing this task before dark was impossible. With their tools in hand, they began chopping trees, but it grew dark as they stripped the bark. Suddenly, they heard a woman scream. Landry suggested extinguishing the torches, and then went to have a look with the tools he could use for combat. They discovered a group of Satanists conducting a ritual, outnumbering them far too much to rescue the poor woman. They could only watch helplessly as she was harmed. Just as they turned to leave, a figure wearing a goat's head mask stood behind them. Without hesitation, Landry charged at the foe, and soon, more assailants appeared. 3 of them held the front line while 2 stayed back. A woman suddenly appeared from behind and knocked a man to the ground. The shouting of the recruits attracted the believers who were performing a ceremony in the distance. After dispatching the enemies in front, Landry carried the injured recruit back toward the shrine. Upon returning, they realized the wounded recruit could not be saved. The Grand Master ordered Draper to take a few brothers to investigate the whereabouts of the Satanists and report back. Landry insisted on accompanying them, but the captain declined his request. Draper and several Knights Templar entered a small grove, but they were ambushed, and all perished. The Satanists couldn't have possessed such advanced weaponry. The ambushers were none other than Prince Louis and his men. After killing them, Louis took their clothing. Meanwhile, Landry prayed at the shrine but was unexpectedly captured by members of the order. While they couldn't expel him, they branded a red-hot cross onto his chest, leaving him permanently marked. Disguised in the Knights Templar attire, Prince Louis and his allies arrived at a household. His objective was the infant being cared for by this family. Prince Louis used the name of the Knights Templar to find Landry's child, and then framed the Knights Templar. It was a sinister plot.